We're going to talk today about this photograph, which was taken in 1926. It is quite an unusual police lineup, for in 1926 these four were known as the Diamond Brothers Gang, headed by the infamous Jack Legs Diamond and his younger brother Eddie. Also in the photo is Thomas Fatty Walsh, another notorious figure of his time. And at the end, we have Salvatore Lucania, better known as Charles Lucky Luciano. Legs Diamond was seen as a mentor to some of the younger up-and-coming generation of mobsters, such as Lucky Luciano and Dutch Schultz. Luciano was badly beaten when he was abducted and questioned about where Legs Diamond was in a police investigation. Schultz was close enough to Diamond to sign his name to identify Diamond's passport. However, Diamond and Schultz would later fall out and go to war with each other. It wasn't uncommon for Legs Diamond to fall out with business partners. All four had several threads connecting them. At the time of this photograph, they were all reputable mobsters in their own right, and some of them were also bodyguards for Arnold Rothstein, or the Brain as he was also known. In the 1920s, Arnold Rothstein was one of the biggest racketeers and bootleggers in the United States. Arnold the Brain Rothstein had become a powerful crime boss, with powerful political connections to New York's vastly corrupt Tammany Hall political organization. Rothstein was alleged to have been involved in one of the biggest sporting scandals of the early 20th century, the 1919 World Series baseball game between the Cincinnati Reds and the Chicago White Sox. Although there was no concrete evidence to connect Rothstein to the scandal, it certainly added to his legend. One author, David Petrusha, suggests that Rothstein worked both ends of the racket with Joseph Sport Sullivan and Abe Attell, the heads of two syndicates that were also involved in the betting. Rothstein was never convicted in the subsequent investigation, although he did testify to a Chicago grand jury to clear his name. Arnold Rothstein would be murdered in 1928, 2 years after this photo was taken, in what was deemed a gambling dispute. Rothstein was shot on the 4th of November but died 2 days later on November 6. Luciano, Diamond, and Walsh were all brought in for questioning about the murder of Arnold Rothstein. Legs Diamond had fallen out with Rothstein, while Fatty Walsh had left Rothstein's employment some weeks previous as he was too cheap, according to Walsh. It was reported that Rothstein was paying Diamond, Walsh, and Eugene Moran $1,000 each. On his deathbed, Rothstein refused to cooperate or name the shooter, answering the police's questions saying, "You stick to your trade. I will stick to mine." George Hump McManus, another gambler who it's believed Rothstein owed money, was arrested, tried, and acquitted with a lack of evidence. However, there was some controversy involved in the trial as McManus had political connections to Tammany Hall too. Now back to this photo. All four were brought in for questioning in connection with a felonious assault. They were supposed to have taken part in an attempted robbery of Charles Hoffman and Albert Levi. On the 1st of December 1926, a car carrying Charles Hoffman and Albert Levi was driving around Central Park. Albert Levi was reported to have $8,000 in his pocket. As they were driving toward 105th Street, a car with four men pulled up next to them. One of the passengers shouted, "Pull over there. We know what you got." With that, Hoffman and Levi drove faster. One of the passengers in the chasing car fired a couple of shots, smashing the glass and hitting Levi in the wrist and right arm. Then the car pulled over, and the four occupants of the other car jumped out and ran to the parked car and began to tussle with Levi. He put up a fight and a crowd began to gather, so the four jumped back into their car and drove off. In the hospital, Levi identified the 4 men. Charles Hoffman confirmed their identities, and 20 detectives were sent out to hunt the attackers and soon arrested Eddie and Jack Diamond, Fatty Walsh, and Lucky Luciano. Two of the 4 were taken to the hospital, so they could be further identified by Albert Levi. However, Levi suddenly forgot who his attackers were. He said, "There's some mistake, these aren't the men." Back at the police station, all 4 were questioned about another unrelated shooting, and then released. Lucky Luciano was issued with a summons to appear in traffic court, while Eddie Diamond was rearrested in connection with a hold-up from the previous week. Let's take a look at each mobster individually, starting with Eddie Diamond, Legs Diamond's younger brother. Eddie and Jack Diamond did their first job together on Commonwealth Avenue in the Bronx in September 1, 1921. They hit the home of John Gorman, who was storing some cases of Irish whiskey there. The brothers quickly loaded the cases onto a stolen truck and made off with them. Mr. Gorman's neighbor witnessed the theft and informed the police. He also gave a description of the suspects and the police arrested Jack. They did not manage to arrest Eddie. The case was dismissed due to lack of evidence. At the beginning of the 1920s, the Diamond brothers were making a name for themselves. The brothers raided everywhere that stored anything of value. It would have been around this time that the Diamond brothers met up with a very young Charles Lucky Luciano, or Salvatore Lucania as he was officially known. Just as the Prohibition era was kicking off, the Diamond brothers became involved with Arnold Rothstein. It's not clear as to how Arnold Rothstein came into contact with the Diamond brothers, but it's likely that Rothstein was the fence for their stolen loot, and liked what he saw in the Diamond gang. Rothstein had a keen eye for talent and later took Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky under his influence. Tuberculosis had ravaged Eddie as well as other members of his family. Eddie had been sent to various sanatoriums to try to get cured, but there was little success or improvement recorded. Legs sent Eddie to Colorado on one occasion as he thought the mountain air would help him, and also because New York had become dangerous. Legs had fallen out with Arnold Rothstein, who Diamond believed had set up him in a European narcotics deal. He had also fallen out with other gangsters like Dutch Schultz. So to get to Legs, they decided to whack Eddie first, and a hit team was sent to Colorado to get him. Joseph Pidio, a Schultz gang member, was believed to be one of the hit team, although a New York Daily News journalist says Fatty Walsh and Eugene Moran were the hit team. The hit team went to Denver and checked into a hotel, posing as men from Montreal. There was also a third man who was the driver, Frank Blubber Devlin. Eugene Moran, a freelancer and kidnapper, had also worked with the Diamond brothers on Rothstein's beer trucks. He was also on Rothstein's payroll as a bodyguard. Gene Moran was sent there as he was able to identify Eddie Diamond. The hitmen hired apartments in the city, and over the next 2 weeks, they were able to track Eddie and get to know his movements better. Having been tracking Eddie for a couple of weeks, the hit team parked their car. They planned to wait until Eddie turned onto the street in his car and then start shooting. Eddie was driving home with his bodyguard, Louis Bifano. When they turned onto the street, the gunman opened fire and a few of the bullets went into the windshield, but somehow the bullets missed both Eddie and Bifano. Eddie crashed the car though, and both Eddie and Bifano made a run for it. The gunman chased them. Bifano got away by escaping down the side passage of 2 houses. Eddie ran into a house and escaped through the back. The gunman that had been chasing him saw that Eddie had escaped, gave up, and went back to his car. Later Eddie and Bifano were arrested, brought in for questioning and released. Legs Diamond, who was still in hiding from the heat of the Hotsy Totsy Club shootings, put his own plan into action, calling in some favors. When the dust had settled, gangland victims were laid out in the morgue. None of them were Eddie Diamond. Eddie Diamond did die, however. Tuberculosis finally caught up with Eddie and he died on the 14th of January 1930. Legs Diamond could not attend the funeral in person as it was too hot. He was still in hiding after the Hotsy Totsy Club shootings. Legs did send an emissary, Charles Vanny Higgins, a bootlegger from Brooklyn.